Hello, this is the video tutorial for the RFN spreadsheet version 4. This video will not review how to set up or authorize your spreadsheet or how to download and use the add-on. If you need help with those topics, please visit the RFN website for separate video tutorials. In this video, we'll be taking a look through each of the tabs in the RFN sheet and how to use them. So the first tab that you'll see in the RFN sheet is the Setup tab. This is involved with authorizing your spreadsheet, which, as I mentioned, there is a separate video tutorial for, so we'll go ahead and skip that and move on to the Submitting Your Recipe tab. This is the next tab in your spreadsheet. So in this tab, we have instructions for how to post your recipe for an audit on the RFN Facebook group. So here's the information that you will need to include with your post. So this is information about your recipe and your pet. And then these are the screenshots of the recipe that you will need to include in your post to make sure that you are getting appropriate feedback. It is really important to include these when you're posting a recipe for an audit, so make sure that you check this sheet out before you post. So next we'll go to the Create a Pet Profile tab. This is actually the first tab that you will likely work on in the RFN sheet because in order to formulate a recipe, you need to create a custom pet profile first. So the first section here is your pet information section, this top section here. This has all the basic information about your pet that we need to create the requirements. So first off here is the pet's name, which is required. Next is the pet species. So the RFN sheet is only made for adult animals, so your options are adult dog and adult cat. Next is the age. This is required in version 4 of the RFN sheet due to some conversions for fatty acids. And then your pet's weight over here, so you can use pounds or kilograms as a unit, whichever you prefer. Next, you'll have to select which base requirements that you want to use. So in the RFN sheet, you have 3 options, AFCO, FATF, or NRC. We do recommend using FATF or NRC for homemade diets. If you have any questions on those, there is a link for you to check out more information on how each of those requirements are calculated. One more thing that I want to note here, if you are formulating for cats, there is an option to select whether or not your cat is overweight. So if your cat is overweight, requirements are calculated a little bit differently, which is why this option exists. This option does not exist for dogs, so if you're formulating for a dog, you won't have to worry about that. Lastly, there is a checkbox for marking if your pet has black fur, which will affect some of the amino acid requirements. Next is the energy needs section. So this section is important to make sure that you are formulating for the correct calories for your pet. The first option is which method you want to use for calculating your energy requirements. The first is current caloric intake, and then the next is the estimated energy factor. So first I'm going to show you what the estimated energy factor one looks like. This basically uses estimated energy factors multiplied by your pet's metabolic weight in order to estimate their caloric intake. This can be good if you are not sure what their current caloric intake is or if you just aren't able to calculate it or audit it for various reasons. But you do want to note that they can be off by as much as 25 to 50%. So it should only be used in cases where you can monitor the pet's weight and their diet and make changes as necessary. Next, you can note whether or not the pet is at an ideal weight. So if you select yes, there's no other options. If you select no, a new field will pop up asking you to enter your pet's ideal weight. So here you can enter your pet's ideal weight, whether or not that's higher or lower than your pet's current weight, and that will affect the recommended daily caloric intake that's listed here. So lastly, you can select whether or not you are going to use the recommended daily caloric intake that is in that white box that's outlined in black. If you don't want to use that, you can select no here and enter the daily caloric intake that you would like to enter for the pet. So if you wanted to calculate your pet's energy needs based on their current caloric intake, which is actually what we recommend, and you select that option, the options do change a little bit here. So instead of entering your pet's estimated energy factor, you would enter their current caloric intake. This green guide box over here does change with some additional information for help on calculating your pet's caloric intake if you need it. Everything else in terms of setting the ideal weight and marking whether or not you want to use the recommended caloric intake is the same. So we'll go ahead and change these settings back so we can save this profile. Next is your macronutrient goals. So this is optional. You do not have to enter this if you don't want for your pet. There is some guides here on how to set these macronutrient goals if you are not certain, so you can go ahead and click on these links if you want more information about those. The protein, fat, and carbohydrate goals are by calorie basis. So how much you want protein to contribute to calories, how much you want fat and carbohydrates to contribute to calories, and it should total 100%. For fiber, the goal that you're setting is by dry matter basis, and there's a little bit information here on how to set that. Next is their bioavailability settings. For those who are not certain on how to set these, there is a guide here, so you can click on this link and see a little bit more information on where to set these settings for using low or high carbohydrate diets. The last section here is the diet restrictions and other notes. So this is just a place for you to enter anything that you want about the pet, whether it's allergies, health conditions, any notes that you want to make about the recipe. You can enter it here and it will be saved into the pet profile. So to use this pet profile, you do need to save it. So to save, you're going to go up to the top and highlight the entire column. You can do that by clicking on the top of the column letter here, and you're going to go ahead and copy it. Then you'll go over to the Saved Profiles tab, you'll go to an empty column, and then you will paste values only. It is really important to paste values only because that will make sure that everything is transferred properly. If you paste normally, then you will see that there's a lot of errors, including formula errors, and the pet profile does not actually transfer properly. So make sure that you're going to paste values only. Next, we'll be going into the recipe builder, which is where most of the recipe formulation happens. So here on the left-hand side, we've got the pet profile section. This is where you will enter your pet's details. So under pet, you're going to go in the drop-down menu. And here you can see all the different pets that are in the Save Profiles tab. If you don't see a pet in here, make sure you have gone ahead and saved it into the Save Profiles, otherwise it won't populate here. And then once you select a pet, you will see the species and standard information populate automatically here. If you've entered some macronutrient goals, they should calculate automatically down here as well. And then over here under recipe 4, you're going to enter the number of days that the recipe is going to be formulated for. Many people like to formulate for 1 day at a time so that you can multiply everything by the batch number of days. Or you can also formulate for multiple days, let's say 14 days or 30 days, and that way you can kind of know the batch amounts of each ingredient while you're formulating the entire recipe. Once you put in the pet's name and the recipe days, you should see requirements populate automatically. If it's not doing that at some point, there may be an issue. You may not have authorized your sheet correctly, or there may be information missing from the pet profile. So I would recommend double checking the pet profile first and making sure there's not any important missing information like the standard or the species name. Up here on the top, you've got your ingredients section. That's these 4 rows right here. So it's your ingredient, quantity, unit, and add to recipe. So the very first row, ingredient, is where you're going to put in the ingredient name. You can do that by clicking on this drop down and scrolling and searching for it this way, or you can start typing something in and find it that way. Next is going to be the quantity. So if you've got your ingredient quantity here, you would enter the number, let's say 50. And then unit, you can select from the drop down menu which unit you'd like to use. For most of your food items, you're going to have an option of grams or ounces. So that's going to be for all of your ingredients, including plant ingredients. And then if you're using supplements, you're going to see the unit for the supplement. That unit is going to refer to the serving size from the supplement in the food database. So for example, if we start to put in a calcium carbonate powder here, we'll see that the only available unit is going to be gram, and that's because in the food database, that's the entered serving size. Versus if we start to look at a manganese tablet, we can see that the only available unit is tablet, and that's because that's what's entered into the serving size for this supplement. And lastly, you can check this box to add the ingredient to the recipe, or you can uncheck it to remove it from the recipe. At the top here, you can name your recipe for saving your recipes. This feature here is called cross-checking requirements and is new to version 4. This allows you to recalculate your pet's requirements based on the recipe's current profile rather than your expected pet's profile from the profile section. So essentially, once you've formulated a recipe, you can always check this box to make sure that your recipe does look correct. If you're going to be using NRC dog requirements, for most cases, this is not really going to do much unless your dog is very high energy. If you're formulating for cats or if you're using AFCO or FADF, this will change your requirements. So for example, let's go ahead and formulate for a cat here. And let's say that we accidentally made this recipe a little bit higher than the cat's actual caloric goal. So we've actually formulated the recipe to be 150% of the cat's calorie goal. Here we can focus on the protein requirement. So right now it is at 23.39 grams. But once we check this box for cross-checking requirements, we can actually see that the protein requirement increases to 35.23. And this is because our calories for the recipe are much higher than we expected. If we bring the calories back down to what we actually expected the recipe to be, you will see that the protein goals will actually come back closer to what we had originally wanted them to be. So this is especially useful if you're using profiles from version 3 of the recipe. This will help you cross-check your requirements in a way that makes the requirements more accurate. And this is really helpful for when you're formulating a recipe that is just lower or higher than the expected amount of calories that you thought it was going to be. Keep in mind that if you leave this checked, your requirements may change constantly as you formulate. So as you increase and decrease ingredients, it may change the protein requirement. On the left-hand side here, we do have a key as well as instructions for how to use Recipe Builder if you would like to use those. These keys indicate what the percentage bars mean. So anything that's green means that it has met the requirement. Anything that is red with white text means that it's exceeded the safe upper limit. For some of these nutrients, there are notes and links, so make sure to check those out if you have questions on how each nutrient is calculated or if any adjustments have been made. For the minerals, there is a special setting on the RFN sheet that helps you indicate whether or not minerals are lower or higher than the other nutrients. This is specific to the minerals, and I do want to note that a mineral that is green but with yellow or red text does not necessarily mean that it's dangerous or that it needs to be lowered or increased. You would really need to kind of keep your eye on it and understand mineral interactions in order to adjust safely from there. However, a good rule of thumb is to keep minerals within a similar range of each other, but it really depends on the recipe and the ingredients. Down at the bottom here, we do have more features. First is the batch ingredients list. If you have formulated your recipe to be for multiple days or for your batch quantity, you may not need to use this, but for those who have formulated their recipe for one day, this is really helpful. So if the recipe is formulated for one day, we can look at what a 10-day serving would be or a 30-day serving would be. So you can get a nice little shopping list here. And you can change the units, so you can select from imperial and metric units. On the right-hand side here, we do have charts for the dry matter bases and the caloric content of the recipe, as well as a chart for your bioavailability settings. Down here, we have your nutrient contributor. So you can see which ingredients are contributing the most to a specific nutrient. So for example, if we look at copper, we can see that the beef liver in this recipe is contributing the most, and that the ground beef and the chicken wings are providing very, very small amounts. Lastly, we have Save Recipe as Ingredient. This feature is for saving your recipe as a food ingredient into your food database, not into your recipe database. If you are using the add-on to save recipes, you do not need to do this because the add-on does do this automatically. We do have a separate video on how to use the add-on, so if you need information about how to download, install, or use the add-on, please check the RFN website for that tutorial. Next is the Condensed Recipe Builder. It is fairly similar to the base recipe builder, except that it is in a different format. It is easier to view on a mobile device, and it does not have all the features that the recipe builder has, but it does have most of the features. So here at the top, you have your pet profile section, pretty similar to the regular recipe builder. Down here, you've got your ingredient section. On the right-hand side, you've got your nutrient analysis, same as the regular recipe builder. And then on the far right, you have your nutrient contributors. Below your ingredients, you have your batch ingredient list, as well as the charts for the dry matter basis, the calories, and your bioavailability settings. Next is going to be your recipe database. The recipe database does come preloaded with your 3 NRC recipes that come with your RFN sheet. And the recipe database's main function is to save recipes in a format that makes it easy to edit them in the future. So it saves the pet information, the ingredients, the ingredient quantities, and the units. If you're using the add-on, this will save into the recipe database automatically when you go to save a recipe. Next is going to be the food database. This is where your ingredients and your recipes are going to be saved as well. On the left-hand side, you've got your full list of nutrients. You will notice that there are several nutrients that are considered non-essential as well. There is a column for instructions, so if you need help with the food database, there is more information here. And then on the right-hand side, we've got all of the ingredients. One thing to note about ingredients is that there are different types that the ingredients can be categorized as. So if you click on this drop-down menu here, you can see the different types. There's animals, cooked starches, other plants, supplements, and recipes. For all of the types except supplements, the serving size, which is row 4 right here, is going to be a numeric value. It is for the number of grams the nutrient analysis is in. For most of the food database items, the number is going to be 100, which stands for 100 grams. So all of these nutritional profiles are for 100 grams of that ingredient. If we go to the back here where the supplements are, on the other hand, you will see that all of the supplements have unique serving sizes, and it's usually text. So for example, we can see that we have capsules, teaspoons, tablets, so on and so forth. When you enter a supplement, you will have to enter a unique serving size here, and you will have to make sure that that serving size matches with the nutrient analysis. So when you go to the supplements website and it says that the serving size is for 2 capsules, and you enter the nutrient analysis for 1 capsule, you need to make sure that the serving size is listed as 1 capsule rather than 2 capsules. Next, we have the recipe report. The recipe report is just a presentation of your recipe, including the recipe ingredients as well as the analysis. So at the top here, you can select the recipe that you want from the drop-down menu. You can select the units that you want, so metric or imperial, and then you can change the amount of days that the recipe is for. On the left-hand side of this, you can see how many days the recipe was originally formulated for, and then on the right-hand side, you can choose here the multiplier that you want. So down here we have the recipe analysis section. So it's going to list the information about the pet from the pet profile. And then over here on the right hand side, you can select whether or not you're again going to cross-check requirements and whether or not you want the recipe report to list the recommended allowance in terms of the absolute total. So for example, 25 grams, or the relative total, which is going to be 100%, 200%, so on. The recipe report does only show most of the essential nutrients that are going to be listed by NRC, FADF, and AFCO. If you would like to see the full list of nutrients, there are some hidden rows here that you can click to show all of the non-essential nutrients. Lastly, we've got the AFCO converter. This is a new tab that comes with version 4 of the RFN spreadsheet, and it allows you to easily convert commercial analyses into a format that is acceptable for the RFN sheet food database and to estimate any nutrients that are missing if you're using an AFCO formulated blend. So for this tutorial, we're actually going to pull up an example of an AFCO balanced kibble that we can use to enter into the AFCO converter. There are a couple of important things here is that one, that this tool will estimate using the AFCO minimum standards for that specific life stage that the kibble is marketed towards. It is really important that you only use this tool when you are absolutely certain that the food is balanced for AFCO requirements. Unfortunately, AFCO is not a regulatory body, so while they do produce these requirements, it is really up to the company and up to the US state whether or not that company is going to be held accountable to the AFCO standards. So if you are not certain on whether or not the food that you're using actually meets AFCO guidelines, I do recommend checking out the guide here, which helps you assess whether or not a company is being truthful when they list that something is formulated to be AFCO complete. Another thing that I want to emphasize here is that you should only fill in these 2 rows, animal weight and minimum calories, if you are using a food that has a feeding chart that is listed with specific food amounts for specific weights. If you are using an AFCO Complete Raw, for example, that uses percentage-based guidelines for feeding, do not fill in these areas as it may under or overestimate the nutrient profile. So only fill this in if, for example, you are using a kibble that lists a very specific amount of food to feed for each weight. Lastly, please keep in mind that this is an estimation. If you are formulating for any type of pet that needs very specific nutrient levels, such as seniors or therapeutic guidelines, I do recommend using your best judgment on whether or not this estimation is going to be correct. So let's take a look at our example here. We're going to be using Ziwi Peak air-dried lamb recipe for dogs. This food is marketed to be complete and balanced for AFCO guidelines for all life stages for dogs. So here in the converter, we're going to go back and fill in this information. And because this has a very specific feeding guideline, we are actually going to fill in this animal weight and minimum calories information. Seaweed Peak does have a feeding calculator on their website, so you can use that, but I'm actually going to go ahead and use the feeding guideline that's listed on the bag. I'm just going to select a weight in the middle here, which says for an 11-pound dog, you should feed 69 grams of this recipe. So we're going to fill in the animal weight here as 11 pounds. And then we're going to go into the analysis and determine how many calories the 69 grams is going to be. So here it says the calorie content is 5,600 kilocalories per kilogram. So we are going to calculate that for 69 grams, which gives us 386 calories. Next, we're going to go ahead and fill in the guaranteed analysis from the website information here. So energy is going to be what I just mentioned, which is 5,600. And then here you're going to select the unit from the drop-down, which is per kilogram. For moisture, protein, fat, and fiber, I'm going to enter it from the guaranteed analysis here on the website. So 14% maximum moisture, 35% minimum protein, 33% minimum fat, and then 2% maximum fiber. Most pet food companies won't list the ash content. Seaweed Peak does, so we're going to go ahead and fill that in as well. So for most kibbles or canned food, this is pretty much going to be the only information that you have about it. So at this point, your estimated profile is complete. So you're going to go ahead and copy this purple column and paste it values only into the food database, the same way that you copied the pet profile. You can also use the add-on to save this into the food database as well. However, for some commercial foods, you do get a lot more of a detailed nutritional analysis. So for example, for the Seaweed Peak, if we go back and look here, they do have a full typical analysis. If we click on this, we get a really detailed view of the mineral and vitamin profile of the recipe. And I'm going to go ahead and show you guys an example of how to enter some of these nutrients. So first here under additional nutrient analysis, you have to select the analysis format. Seaweed Peak does give you the analysis as received, which means as fed, or on a dry matter basis. For different companies, you may only get one or the other, so you will have to select which one you're going to go with. For here, we're going to go with the as received column, so we'll select that from the drop-down menu. And then right off the top here, we're going to start with some minerals. So we're going to scroll down to the mineral section. Calcium is 1.88%, so we're going to click on calcium and select 1.88%. And when we do that, we can see that the calcium changes. So it goes from an expected value of 18869, which is going to be the estimated value of calcium for a kilogram of this food. But then the true calcium analysis, according to Seaweed Peak, is going to be slightly less, which is 18800. Next, we'll look at copper here, which is listed as milligrams per kilogram. So if we go down to copper, we're going to enter 66. And then in the drop-down menu, you can select milligrams per kilogram. For the next example, we're going to use vitamin A. So it's listed here as 169,480 international units per kilogram. So we're going to go ahead and enter that as is. 169,480 IU per kilogram, or international units per kilogram. So in the same way, you can enter in the full nutrient analysis here, and that will automatically adjust the values in this purple column so that it is accurate for the analysis that you put in. So that's how to use the AFCO converter. Again, if you have any doubts on whether or not a food is complete or balanced, please do not use this estimator because it will over or underestimate certain nutrients and it may throw off your formulation by quite a wide margin. And that's the end of the RFN sheet tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Jenny at bettercellsnutrition.com. If you have a tech support ticket, you can reach out to support@bettercellsnutrition.com.